Hey everybody, this is Jeff Markiafava from MinMax, and if you're like me, you spent all of 2022 buying more board games to add to your collection, and then you laid awake at night thinking about how many board games you have to play, and how you don't possibly have enough time or people to play them all with. And what are you going to do with the rest of your life? Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you bought the perfect number of board games, and you just played those games and you had a great time. I'm not here to cast aspersions about what kind of lovely person you are. I'm here to tell you my favorite board games that I played during 2022. Okay, here we go. I already feel less pressure down here in the little box than in the big box. I should say before we start that, like I just said in the terrible intro, these are games that I played in 2022, my favorite games that I played in 2022. They didn't necessarily all come out in 2022. Board games are a little different from video games in that sense that there's not usually one universal release date. Sometimes they'll come out only in a couple countries or one region, and sometimes they'll have like a super small first print that immediately goes out of sale and then they're not available for another, year or whatever. So these games, most of them are from 2022. Some of them aren't. It doesn't matter. You're going to walk away from this with a ton of great recommendations. So don't worry about it. Let's see. I have kind of categorized these into a couple different categories with a couple picks for each one. So that will help you as well as we go through them. You don't have to worry about it. I'll explain it all as we go. Let's do the first one right here. This is going to be a couple recommendations for two-player games. If you really like two players, you have a significant other or a roommate or whatever that you play a lot of games with and just that one person, then the first one, and my favorite one from 2022, I would have to say, is Splendor Duel. And Splendor Duel, this is one of those games where they have taken a game called Splendor, believe it or not, and I think this was Bruno Catala, is kind of the master of doing this, where he will take a larger game that plays a bunch of people, and then he figures out a way to shrink it down to just two people and make it super interesting. And so in Splendor Duel, or in the original Splendor, you're getting those gems that you can see right there, which are really nice poker chips. These ones are kind of mini poker chips, but they have a really good feel to them. And so basically you're getting those gems, you're using them to buy cards, which will also act as gems in the future, but you don't have to actually spend them or turn them in. Once you have them, you can use them every turn. And so it's a little engine building game. And what's interesting about the two-player version of it is that you have a couple different... So they added a couple different victory conditions to it. And that's one of Catala's base favorite things to do, and which works really well in two-player games specifically. Is you have a couple different ways that you can win. You can win based on just points, or also some cards have crowns and or just points within a certain specific color of things. It doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. Point is, you have three different ways of winning the game that you have to kind of... You can target different ones, but then you also kind of have to block out your opponent in those different ways. And that's an interesting mechanism. The other thing that's interesting about it is that you now have this little player field thing that you can see there, where the different chips go out, and there's a spatial element to it where you can take 3 every turn. And then you're using those. In base Splendor, you basically just picked which ones you want. And so that kind of spatial puzzle, which is interesting, you're also choosing when you can fill up the board, and you have those little scroll tokens, which give you a couple extra options of things to do. So just kind of that spatial puzzle in order to get the gems, and then having multiple victory conditions that you can go for, make it a really interesting and really fun two-player game. It's really quick, 30 minutes it says there. That's accurate. And it all fits in this nice little box. It's a nice small little package, very good production values. And so if you're looking for that, I would call that one my favorite two-player game, but we got a couple more recommendations for those as well. All right. Here's the second game. I had to pause there because I couldn't believe it that both of these two-player games, which are both excellent, are both published by Space Cowboys, which is impressive. But so Botanik or Botanik, which however it's pronounced, is a two-player tile laying game. So you have all those tiles, which you'll see in a minute, and you're going to be building out a pipe network, kind of like the old pipe game we all know, pipe cleaning fluid game, whatever. Don't worry about it. You're going to be building out kind of a area in front of you with all these different interconnected pipes. But what makes this interesting is you can see from this amazing little simulation that I'm doing here, is the way that you choose tiles is different, and there's kind of a two-step process to it, where you're gonna have a couple tiles laid out there that you and your opponent are going to be choosing between, and then you're going to be putting them in slots on your little player mat there. And they're going to have to choose. They're going to have to match the middle row based on either the color or the type of tile that it is. And so you're choosing one, you're putting it in the right spot. But then the other thing that you can do is you can put a tile in the center row over one of those. And basically, if you break whatever is connecting your tile to that tile, so like if they were both blue, they both matched blue, and then you put a red tile over the center one, then that releases your tiles, at which point you can then put them out in your little puzzle below. And so that creates kind of an interesting, there are lots of tile laying games and a lot of kind of route building games like this, which it essentially is. But that gives it an interesting feel where you're drafting the tiles that you want. Sometimes you're drafting them just to release the tiles that you want. And also when you release the tile, your opponent will also have a tile on their side as well. And so if you break their connection as well, they also get to place their tile right away. And so ideally, you'll pick one that releases yours but doesn't release theirs, so they'll have to do it on their own turn. But so it's an interesting way to kind of switch up the drafting of the game for which tiles you get, and then figuring out when to release them so that you can figure out the spatial puzzle below, and that kind of pipe laying game is interesting. You score in a couple different ways, which we don't have to go into all the different ways, but there's enough scoring options to make that interesting as well. But it's really that kind of two-step drafting and releasing the tiles that makes it a really interesting game. Like Splendor Duel, which I guess, based on the fact that it's from the same publisher, it's another 30-minute game, which is very accurate. It's two-player only, but also has just super nice production values, which you can probably tell from this. That you have that big kind of stone marker that you're sliding between so that you can remember whose turn it is, because whoever's turn it is will choose 3 of the 2 tiles, which again is kind of in the weeds. But yes, it's just a nice, if you like tile laying games and drafting games, this is a nice quick head-to-head one that you should check out as well. So that is Botanik or Botanik. I don't know the exact pronunciation on it. 2 other quick 2-player recommendations. I have talked about these before, so I won't go into a ton of detail for them because we got a lot of games to go through. But the first one is Great Plains here, which is kind of a very quick area control game that you have these hexagons that you're putting out. This is also kind of a 2-step game where you're first choosing caves that are on these tiles, and then from those caves you can start placing out your little meeples, which are either foxes or snakes, and you're spreading out trying to get to the meadow or the plain areas, and just getting area majority in those, and it's real quick. I mean, like super quick, but there's enough variability in the tiles, which are all double-sided, and then you have a couple different animals that you'll see on some of those tiles, and if you go on them, those will give you a special ability that you can use on future tiles. So just very quick, it is more head-to-head competitive. I think the one drawback that I would say of Great Plains is that you really have to get out there and you have to fight over the kind of contested areas. There will be some areas that you're right next to, your cave is right next to, your opponent's not going to be able to get to it. So those are fine, but the game really, whether you win or lose, will come down to those shared areas that you both can get to, and you really have to go for those and be willing to be cutthroat about it. Otherwise, you'll just kind of the last third of the game, say, or quarter of the game is just kind of filling in the last couple pieces. So you really have to fight for those. And if you don't like, tough head-to-head games like that, then this one might not be for you. But it's also so quick that, I wouldn't worry too much about hurt feelings. But so that is Great Plains. I've talked about it before in more depth, but that's another nice one to check out too. And the last two-player recommendation that I will make, this is kind of the bigger game, is That Time You Killed Me by Pandasaurus Games. This one's, as you can see, it says it's 15 to 30 minutes, and that is true, but you're probably going to want to play a couple different games in a row because it's a strangely thematic game for what looks like a pure abstract game, but the idea of it is that it's almost like chess where you have some pawns that you're moving around, but you have 3 different boards that you're moving them on, which represent the past, present, and future. And you are jumping through time on them. So you can move your pawns from the past board up to the present or the future, kind of one step at a time, and that's fine. You'll leave that area. But if you go back in time, you're actually making a clone of yourself because you'll go back in time and then they will eventually show up in the future again. And so it's very mind-bendy right out of the box. But then you also have all of these smaller boxes, which represent different chapters, and each one unlocks a new mechanism that completely changes it and makes it more interesting. And this is just one that really blows your mind once you start playing it. It's hard to describe. Like, it's still, the rules are very simple, and each chapter you'll kind of go through it, and it's only a couple extra rules, and it's very easy to explain. But then you'll just kind of sit there and look at the board and consider all of the complications that it adds, and it's just really interesting, meaty, abstract choices, and just a ton in the box, because each chapter you can eventually kind of mix and match the different mechanisms that it adds, and its systems, just kind of introducing more and more systems that you can play around with. It kind of just becomes this big abstract time-traveling sandbox that you can mess with. And there is a ton. If you are looking for a meatier, abstract, 2-player only game, That Time You Killed Me would be my definite recommendation for that one. So those are the 2-player recommendations that I had. So we will move on now to a solo recommendation. I have one solo recommendation, but it's actually kind of 4 solo recommendations together. So the main game is called Onirim, or I think it's Onirim. But it has its own universe that the developer has, or the designer has kind of created, and all of the other subsequent games kind of live within that universe. They have a very specific art style to them, which you may or may not like. It has grown on me, and I enjoy it. I'm talking specifically about Onirim here. This is the only one that I'm really going to be showing any gameplay of. But it says 15 minutes. Man, you can have shorter games than that. Onirim is kind of these all say 2-player too. You can play them 2-player, but they are mostly played solo, I would think. They're kind of designed to be great solo games. And Onirim is purely a card game, and it's kind of the closest feeling to a traditional, solitaire type card game almost. You have these cards that are in a couple, 3 different colors, but then each one also has one of 3 different symbols on it, and you're basically trying to make a row of 3 cards of the same color, but you can never put a card that has the same symbol as the previous one on it. So you're going to have 3 colored cards that have different symbols on them. It doesn't have to be all 3 symbols. You can go sun, moon, sun, or whatever. And if you do that, then you get to go through the deck of cards like I'm demonstrating here. Amazingly, what a hand model I am! And you can pull out the door card for that color. There are 2 of every color, 2 door cards for every color, and there are, I think, 4 colors. And so you have to unlock all of them. So that's kind of the base idea of the game. There are some other wrinkles in there where if you have a key of the right color and you draw that door, you instantly get to unlock it. So that's a cool, nice bonus. But then there are these nightmare cards, which you can see one of them there. I'm kind of refilling my hand here. But normally when you pull one of those cards out, you have a couple different options for how you deal with it, but you're gonna have to deal with it, and it's all bad. However you deal with it, you're going to be shedding cards either from your hand or from the deck, and you lose if you run out of cards in the deck. And so it's a really interesting and tight system. It's fairly straightforward, and it does have kind of that solitaire patience, solitaire kind of feel to it. But what makes it interesting and what makes all of the games in this this line interesting is that each one comes with like half a dozen variations in the game. So you have this big deck of these cards, but then you have another pretty much equally big deck with a bunch of extra cards that you can kind of, each one will have a page in the rule book of how that kind of variation or expansion works, and you'll shuffle it in there, and then you'll have this other new interesting wrinkle to the gameplay, and you just, every time you play, you choose which one that you want to add. You can also add multiple of them, and so it just gives you an exponential number of ways to kind of play and explore this system. And so Onirim is a class, just a straight up card game, but then you can at least see the components for the other ones. That one is Nautilian, and so that one has dice rolling and dice mitigation to it, which is really interesting. Arian also has dice rolling with kind of a Yahtzee mechanism where you're trying to get runs or straights or 2 of a kind or 3 of a kind to kind of complete these things. And then Castellian is a tile laying game with this interesting spatial puzzle. They all kind of have a similar, most of them, and there are other ones in the series. These are the 4 that I play and really enjoy. But most of them kind of have that idea of you have certain colors of either cards or tiles that you want to group together, while also you have a separate thing of like patterns that you want to kind of have those be different. So it's kind of mixing that same and different things, and there's always a feeling that you are running out of time. You're either running out of the deck or you're running out of tiles or whatever. And you have to kind of figure out how to beat it before you get to that. All of them have, like I said, that 4 or 5 or more expansions in the box that makes them all super replayable, and they're all really interesting. So I would say Onirim is kind of the classic, and I think the highest rated one. So that's one to go for. But if you like dice games more than card games, Arian or Nautilian are the ones you should check out. Or if you like tile laying, Castellian would be the one to check out. But they're all good. They're all great. So check those out if you are looking for a solo game. Let's see. After solo, we are going to go to roll and write games. I got two roll and write recommendations for you. The first one is Long Shot the Dice game. And this one is really interesting in that it says 25 minutes there. You'll probably get down to 25 minutes the more that you play it. First game's probably not going to be 25 minutes, especially if you have a bunch of people playing. But as it says there, it plays between 1 to 8 players. I think I played an 8-player version of it, if not very close to that upper limit. And it still plays great, which is great. This is a lot of roll and write games are kind of that Yahtzee mold where you'll have a little sheet of paper that you're trying to fill in things, and it's very simple. This feels like more than that, but it plays as fast as a roll and write game. This is an actual, horse racing game. Each of those horses has a number that you'll roll one die that tells you which of those to move, and then another die which will tell you how many spaces. But each of the horses, and this is kind of the interesting mechanism that I'm trying to point out here, each of them also has a list of the other horses under it, and they will trigger those other horses to move when their number has been rolled. So if you roll a 6, it'll also tell you, okay, also move the 2 and 3 horses or whatever one space as well. And one of the interesting things is one of your options, you'll roll the dice, you'll move those horses, and then everybody has a turn that you'll all do simultaneously. And you have a bunch of different options that you can choose from. One of those is to mark off other horses on those other horse cards. So if you have one specific horse that you're rooting for, or maybe you can even buy the horses, so then you own that horse, so then you really want it to win, you can start marking off that horse on other cards. And all of the other options are really interesting like that. There's kind of a spatial game where you're marking off, like a more traditional roll and write, you're kind of marking off different numbers, and then once you fill a row or column, you get some super cool bonus, or otherwise you are, you're betting on the other horses. You have a certain number of money that you can spend. And that is the kind of player card that you have in front of you. It's dry erase, so you can go through and kind of, mark all those off and then just erase it all at the end of the game. So it's, very replayable. You don't have to worry about running out of a stack of, pieces of paper. And it's just a really interesting, fun puzzle. Most of the time, roll and write games are very isolated. You will be doing your thing and everybody else will be looking at their sheet. But this is, at its core, there is a race that's going on, and you're all kind of trying to figure out which horses to bet on. You have some of the other powers that you can trigger are, you can actually choose a horse and move them up or even move them back. And so the horse racing part of it is really tense and really fun, and kind of, everybody will be cheering or moaning depending on, whose horse is going up in front. The other interesting thing is that it comes with a couple of different variations for each horse, and each one has a special power that you will get to use, you and only you, if you buy that horse. So lots of replayability in there as well for that one. It's a relatively fast game, and it still kind of has that roll and write feel where you're going to be marking off things on your own little player area, but then there's like the communal horse race that is really fun and really exciting. So that is Long Shot the Dice game. Just a very nice production again as well. Very small box that everything fits into, but there's a bigger fun game within that small box. So check out that one. All right, my last roll and write, I only have 2 roll and writes, and this one is kind of a cheat anyway. This is Guild of Merchants. It would actually be considered a flip and write, but even then it's not really a flip and write. It is instead of marking things off on, your own player sheet, you actually have a map which you can see there, and you're going to be putting out little squares on it instead. So they have kind of taken this idea that very much feels like a roll and write or flip and write game, but they have put it in a larger box that feels like a larger experience of a normal kind of big board game. But at its heart, it very much feels like a flip and write game where you're going to be flipping over a card. It will tell you what terrain you can mark off. You would mark it off if it was a flip and write game, but instead you're putting out squares on those spots, and you're kind of building out routes from a main area, and you're going out and you're exploring this this map. But what makes it interesting is that you will do this. You have like 5 cards that you go through, and so you'll be building out that route, and then when you're done, you will reshuffle that deck, and you will basically wipe off all the tokens on your board unless you build settlements out there. So you're trying to get out there, build a settlement, and then you can build out from that settlement on future rounds. And so there's this interesting kind of... I guess I'm making a wave gesture with my hands where you're building out, then you're resetting, then you're sprawling out from those kind of footholds that you got on the map to try and reach the very edges, and that's interesting. The other interesting thing is that each round you will be unlocking. You'll get a special card, which are the Roman numeral cards, and that will tell you that will be a specific ability that you have for just you. It's your own special ability. So it'll be like, instead of just being like mark 1 desert location off, it will be like mark 5 locations that are either desert or grasslands or something like that. Like they're way more powerful, and so it feels really special, like you have this special power that no one else has. And then on top of that, you have a ton of different replayability. There are some of those special abilities that I was talking about. And so those will get triggered every single round after the round that they're introduced. You'll get 3 of them in total. But the other thing that makes the game great is that you have multiple maps, and then you have multiple objectives as well that will change up every time that you play. So lots of replayability in the box. And if you want to hear more about that one, you can go watch one of our previous podcasts where I talk about all those different games again. But that was Guild of Merchant Explorers, so check that one out. From there, we are going to the world of polyomino games. What's a polyomino, you ask? It's basically a tetromino, like Tetris, is a shape that's made out of 4 boxes. A domino would be 2 boxes, like dominoes. And polyomino just means a certain number of boxes. And in this case, this is Monolyth from Come On Games. Plays 1 to 4 players, 30 minutes, very quick game, polyomino game. But this one is 3D. You have those pieces that, some of them are Tetris pieces, some of them are only 3 pieces or 2 pieces or 2 blocks. But you are building an actual 3D cube in front of you. So you can see this, it's a very common idea in polyomino games where you will have kind of a row or, a circle or something of the pieces that you're kind of moving around, and that's how you're going to draft your pieces. So you'll kind of take turns going around. You'll pick which ones you want, but then you place them on your own little cube there, and you're building in 3D. And the basic idea of it is that you are trying to... Each of your sides will be a different color, and you're trying to get all of the faces on that side to be the right color. You're trying to build them up. And what's interesting about it is that on your turn, you'll either take a piece or you will take one of the scoring numbers. And there's typically only one number of each scoring, and that's how many points you'll score for a side, but only if you have at least that many numbers on that side. So if you put like a 14 on one side, you'll score 14 points, which is great, but you have to make sure that you have 14 squares visible on that side. And so there's kind of a push your luck element to it. And then, of course, once you have chosen that number, everyone knows that that's what you're going for, and so they could potentially block you by picking those numbers. There are a couple other ways to score. You'll score points if you're the first one to build a complete level, and then you can see a card that's there on that kind of center board that has a specific pattern that you want to. If you make that pattern as you're building up, you'll also score different points. But the heart of it is really you build that, as you can see here in the example, you build up those sides and then you count them out. And if you have them, you score it and you get those points. I just gave thumbs up while I gave thumbs up in the video because I'm watching it as I'm talking about it. But if you don't have the right number, then you lose all those points. And so it's a very simple idea. It's very quick. But it's a fun one, and it's an interesting. There are a ton of polyomino games where you're laying out kind of Tetris shaped pieces and trying to make things. There aren't a ton of 3D ones, and this is just a really nice production of it, of that idea of all the blocks are super nice, big chunky blocks, and it just feels good to kind of build yourself a little cube like that. And the scoring is enough that it keeps it interesting. So that is Monolyth. Okay, Isle of Cats. So this is from the City of Games, 1 to 4 player. It is a longer game, as you can tell there, 60 to 90 minutes. Won't go into a huge explanation of how the rules play, but the idea is you have this board that represents a boat, and you will be getting polyomino tiles shaped like cats, and you're trying to cram them onto your boat because you're saving these cats from this island. There's actually a very in-depth backstory to it, and there are multiple games in the line, go figure. But so you're not only drafting the tiles that you're going to be placing out, but you'll draft those cards too that I showed you, and I'll show you them again in a minute. But the cards are what are really interesting because they give you a bunch of different powers and things, but they also will, basically everything runs on the cards. So you draft the cards, but then you have to pay for the cards with fish, but you're also using the fish to pay for the tiles that you want to get. So there's an interesting kind of economy there. But then the cards give you different kind of power-ups that will help you for the rest of the game, and then they give you a ton of ways that you can score points. And I always love games where you're kind of setting your own scoring, the ways that you can score and that only you can score. And this game just has a giant deck of cards with a ton of different ways to score, and also cute little kittens everywhere. Plenty of kittens, if you're into kittens. I'm not even a cat person, and I enjoy it. But so this one I enjoy so much because a lot of polyomino games end up being lighter games, and there is actually a family mode included in this that you can play that simplifies the rules. But if you want a meatier game, this one is there for you because the draft, it has a ton of interesting drafting choices, and then being able to build out how you score for all the different ways that you have your cats in there, which cats are you scoring you extra points and all of that stuff. That gives you a ton of replayability and makes it a thinkier game as far as polyomino games go. So check out the Isle of Cats if you're looking for a meatier polyomino game. But my favorite polyomino game, I'm going to say, from 2022, the Isle of Cats has been out for a while as well, I should say, and there was even or still is a Target version that you can get. So very widely available, great game. My favorite one from 2022, polyomino game, I'm going to say, is New York Zoo. New York Zoo from Capstone Games. This one really surprised me. It's from Uwe Rosenberg, who is a very well-known designer, and also very well-known polyomino game designer. He has designed a ton of these kind of games where you're laying out and making these kind of Tetris configurations on your own board. This one specifically looks a lot like other polyomino games, and once I set it up here, you'll see that you have that ring again that you're going around, and that's kind of how you're drafting what tiles you're choosing. What makes this one interesting is that you're building out a zoo, so each Tetris piece that you're getting is kind of a pen for animals to go into, and then you have all these different animal meeples that you're filling in, and when you fill one of them up, you'll get a bonus. You'll basically wipe out all the animals, which doesn't happen in zoos, hopefully. But then you'll get a bonus tile, and the whole point of the game. So there's kind of that interesting mechanism that's going on. You're moving an elephant around that center ring. But every time you go across the brown sections that you can see there, each area has a different animal. You have one area for each animal, and when the elephant passes that spot for that animal, all of the pairs that you have, if you have a pair in your pen, they will breed, and so that's how you're creating new meeples to go on those spots. So you're kind of building out a full zoo. You'll hopefully have at least one section for each animal, and that's how you're kind of you're filling them out. But what makes it really interesting is that it's essentially a race. What you really want to do, and the way that you win, is you just fill in every space on your zoo, and that's really the only thing that you have to worry about. It's just that filling in all of the meeples will get you bonus tiles, which also help fill things in. And especially you can see in the lower right hand corner, those are the bonus tiles, and that's where you get the kind of one spot, one square or two square ones, which you're gonna have holes left over as you're trying to fill them in. And so that creates this really interesting and tight race, and also extremely well balanced race. Like each player mat, the number of spots is determined by the player order. Even like they've factored all of that in, so it's this really tight, close race, and you're just trying to fill in your entire zoo as quickly as you can, because that's how you win. That's the one thing that you have to focus on. It's just that there are these other kind of mechanisms going on that can help you fill it in a little bit faster, and you have to use them. You have to fill it in as fast as you can. So it's an interesting race. It's an interesting kind of deviation from tile laying games like this, from polyomino games, that has really impressed me. I've played it with 5 players, which is the maximum count, and I've played it with 2 players, and it's equally interesting and also equally competitive. So if you're looking for a competitive and also a game that has just a ton of really cute little animal meeples, definitely check out New York Zoo. That's a great one. Next up, point salad games. What is a point salad game, you ask? A point salad game is a game where you basically, whatever you're doing on your turn, you are scoring a bunch of points, and that always feels good. This one is called Mille Fiori, I suppose it would be called. It's a kind of Italian glass making theme, but it is essentially a point salad game by Reiner Knizia, who was a very famous designer. And basically, you have this big board, you have a ton of spaces, as well as Renaissance-looking Italian guys in there. and you have those nice looking little gems. And so you'll be getting cards. These are the different kinds of cards. There's a drafting mechanism to them, so you'll be choosing cards, one at a time, and then everyone will play them at the same time. And those cards will determine where you put out one of your little glass tiles for that turn. They're not actually glass; they're clear plastic. But so each area of the board will score in different ways, wildly different ways, and there are also combos that you can trigger when you go to each of those. Each one has like combos that you can trigger in different ways, and so ideally you'll get to the point where you are putting out a tile. You'll score a bunch of points for that tile. You might score a massive bonus of like 20 points because each one has its own little side objective there that you can score. So you'll maybe get a bunch of points from there, but then maybe you will also trigger one of these combos. And basically what the combo is if you meet that, whatever the criteria is in that location, if you meet it, you immediately get to take another one of the cards that's on the side of the table there, and you're essentially just taking another turn immediately. And so you'll pick one of those cards, you'll do that card, and if you're lucky, that card will also trigger another combo, and you'll just like trigger a bunch of things, you'll score a ton of points in a row, and you'll feel really smart, and it feels really good. And so it's 60 minutes, 90 minutes. It feels like a pretty fast game, and it plays up to 4 players, and it just looks pretty once you have all those different, colored glass tile, quote unquote glass tiles out there. You can see in this kind of shaky first person camera work, me simulating kind of one of these bigger combos, but each area scores in a completely different way, and they just all feel really satisfying. It's a very impressive design from that perspective of a point salad game. Each one just feels really good. So that is Mille Fiori from Devir. Devir has been putting out just great games recently, and they aren't showing any sign of slowing down. So that is the latest one to check out from them. 2 more quick recommendations for point salad games. I've talked about both of these before, so we will go quickly. The first is Caesar's Empire from Holy Grail Games. Holy Grail. 2 to 5 players, 30 to 60 minutes. All that checks out. For this one, you basically have a giant map of Rome, and you are all taking turns, very quick turns. You're just basically putting out some of your people on a path to the next city of this map of Rome. But when you put them out, you're scoring for each of your pieces along the route, but everyone else is also scoring for their pieces if the route that you built goes through their pieces as well. So you're trying to spread your guys out enough that you will score on other people's turns, or conversely, you can build them all along the same route, and even if you're the only person using that route, you'll score a ton of points each time you build those out. And then each city that you go to will have its own scoring marker that you'll score the highest one for that color of city. But then each one will also have a good, and you are scoring your goods based on two different factors, where you're scoring for having the most of the same one. You'll score a certain number of points for each of those, and then you will score also for having the most diverse groups of different goods. So it's kind of two-way scoring, but basically like a point salad game, you're going to be scoring a bunch of points each turn, and you'll also score points on other people's turns, which is a new and interesting. I don't know how new it is, but it's a fun kind of twist on those point salad games. So check out Caesar's Empire. Great production values, huge map, and all those little pieces are fun to put out. You feel like an emperor putting out all those pieces. So check out that. That's Caesar's Empire. And the last point salad game is a bit of a stretch because it's not actually. I'm gonna call it a point salad game just because you will be scoring points, but you score them all at the end of the game. But basically, it's called Akropolis. It's from Hachette game. Hachette is the publisher, which is another publisher that you should be watching because they are bringing a ton of really great games out recently, and they show no signs of slowing down either. But basically, you are building out this little city with all of these very nice chunky cardboard tiles. You will be drafting out the different tiles that will build out your city, and each of those colors scores in a different way. And then also there are kind of multiplier symbols on some of them that will kind of boost up those scoring. So you're drafting the tiles, you're building out the city, you technically score all the points at the end, but each turn you're definitely thinking, okay, which of these is going to score me the most points? And there's enough variability in how they score and also kind of advanced variations for them that will give you enough replayability and enough choices in each game in terms of what do I want to build out? What am I going to double down on some of these and really try and score the most points? There's also a 3D element there which I didn't mention. But so, am I going to kind of diversify and go for a bunch of different little things, or am I going to double down on some of these and score a bunch of points for those? Super quick city building game. Most of the time, it doesn't go as fast as this one does, but that has really impressed me about it. So check out Akropolis if you're looking for that kind of 3D city building game. Just very nicely done. The next category here is, I'm calling it minis game. Best minis games, which is a bit of a stretch. But hey, a lot of people like getting board games that have a ton of minis. And if you are one of those people, I got a couple different options for you here. The first one is called Massive Darkness 2, as you can see there. It's from Command, which I think all of these games, yes, all three of these minis-focused games are from the company that is called Cool Minis or Not. Go figure. But this one, it plays 1 to 6 players, and it's a cooperative dungeon crawling game. Very much kind of in the vein of a Diablo-esque board game version of a dungeon crawling game. And this one, as you can see from all of these components, I'm not going to give you a full rundown of it because it is a huge game, and that's where I kind of... This is a tough one for me to fully recommend. Like, you have to know what you're getting going into it because it is a huge game. There is a ton in that box. It takes a long time, almost as long to play because it is a very short, you are doing 60-minute kind of playthroughs of it. It takes a long time to get everything out and then also tear it down and put everything back in the box. But if you're okay with that, there is a ton of content in this game. You have 6 different characters that you can play, and each one has wildly different mechanisms for how they play, which is super cool. The thief has kind of this bag building element where you're pulling out these chips that tell you what you can do on your turns. The paladin, I think, has kind of these area effect locations that you can put out. You're leveling up your character as you play, so you are getting stronger abilities as you're going along. And then you're fighting all of these different kind of big bad guys that all look super cool. Very cool minis for all of that. And then the other thing that's interesting about it that kind of separates it from other games of this, which kind of, again, makes me really like it and makes me really interested in this game, is that you have this big kind of campaign book essentially, and so there's like 10 different chapters in it or whatever, but each of those is a one-off experience. You are starting at level 1 for each of them. You're building up your character, to max level during one specific, hour-long playthrough. And you can play them out of order. You can just choose which one you want. So when you start playing it, you're not kind of pot committed to playing with the same group over 12 different play sessions to kind of get everything that you want to play. And then it's like, okay, well, I'm going to play with someone else this time, but now we kind of have to start from the beginning. There's none of that. You can just choose who you're playing with. You can further switch it up by choosing different of the larger enemies. You'll be drawing those from one of the many decks of cards that you have in there. So there's a lot of modularity to it. That really appeals to me. And the fact that you have all of these different characters, that makes it easier to play all the different characters. You can choose a different one every time you play without worrying about like, oh, now I have to start completely over because I want to play as the rogue or whatever. No, you can just that play session you can jump in with this different character. The only drawback is that, yes, as you can see from this speed lapse footage, which normally you don't have to take out every single mini when you're playing, but it is just a ton to try and get back into that box every time that you play. If you're cool with that, if you've played, giant Kickstarter mini games or minis games, then that probably won't bother you, and it's one to check out because it is legitimately a great co-op dungeon crawling game. So that is Massive Darkness 2. If that idea of playing a huge game that's going to take as much time to take everything out and put it all back in, if that is a no-go for you, then you will want to check out Marvel United, which is also by Command, turns out. They make a lot of great minis games. And this one, another co-op game, it's scaled down, certainly. You will see it when I set it out. But this is a game they have run several Kickstarters now, multi-million-dollar Kickstarters with a ton of extra content. But just the base box of these, there's Marvel United, there's X-Men United. They're coming out with another one. They go to retail in these smaller kind of base boxes that are very cheap. You can probably pick it up on sale for around $15. And there's the amount of content in it will get old eventually. But if you just want to dabble, and if it's just a game that you want to, like a game that you can play with your family, it's absolutely worth checking out. The basic idea is everybody chooses one of the, main Marvel characters. I got Hulk and Captain America here because they're great. You'll pick a different bad guy each time. I think it comes with 3 in the box, base box. And then you'll have these different locations, and you're basically going to those locations. You're trying to, each boss has its own way that you're playing, but you are putting out these different cards. You will have your own deck of cards for your character. And you'll take turns playing out your cards. But what's interesting about it is they build off of each other. So you will do the symbols on your card, but you will also do the symbols on the card of the person who played before you. So you'll have your super powerful Hulk smashing power, but then you'll also do what Captain America did before you or whoever. And it's just kind of this race to get everything done before the bad guy triggers enough of their powers. They're filling up that gauge there that will slowly move you towards defeat, and they're kind of beating up the little civilian tokens there. You're beating up the thugs, and you're just you're trying to get three objectives done, or I think you can just do 2 of the objectives and then beat up the bad guy. But just a lot of variability there. Like I said, the base box doesn't have as much variability. And there's a huge aftermarket, and I'm sure there will be subsequent Kickstarters where you could do a big buy-in and just have so much content that you'll never be able to play it all. That doesn't appeal to me as much. Frankly, I like having a $15 box that has a fair amount of characters that you can mix and match and a couple different bad guys. And that's good enough for me. That's all I want. The actual minis in this, I didn't do close-ups, unfortunately, because I forgot about that. But they are cute little chibi-style minis of pretty much the expanded content, the extended universe content has pretty much every character that you could ever want. But the base box has a good mix, and there are several different base boxes that you can get that have some mix of very different. I couldn't figure out what I was trying to do in the example there. Lots of good content. And a very fun, quick family level game that doesn't take a ton of time to put out. You basically just pick your characters, you have your little deck. There are extra little markers there to put out, but everything goes back in the box very quickly, even if you're not doing speed lapse footage. So that's Marvel United, or also X-Men United. They have another multiverse kind of united game right now that I think is going on Kickstarter right now. But don't worry about that. That's a good one to check out. My last minis game, though, is another very big box, also by Command, go figure. It looks like a dudes on a map game, and I'm not usually a huge fan of dudes on a map games, but I like this one, and I should preface this one saying it goes up to 5 players. I have only played the 2-player game. I enjoy the 2-player version of it. That's why it is on this list, because it is a really interesting 2-player head-to-head game that is actually, it plays more almost like an abstract strategy or Euro game. Like the mechanisms of it are what are really interesting. You're not rolling any dice. It's not that kind of big Ameritrash, head-to-head smash your opponent kind of game. It is more strategic than that, and you are kind of, you're putting your characters out. You're trying to take control of these areas, and you have this action selection mechanism that is really interesting, where you pick one thing, you do it, and then you have to pick another one that's lower in the rank. But if those tokens get moved up to the last spot, then you're also triggering this other thing that happens, and that's kind of the timeline that moves you through and will eventually trigger big conflicts between the characters. The actual conflicts are also interesting because you have this hand of cards, and each one has some kind of special ability on it that will add to your power in that area. And though the conflicts are super important, but it doesn't just feel like a Risk style, I'm going to beat you up, you're going to beat me up, I'm going to, back and forth kind of game. Like it is more mind games and kind of almost hits that like political intrigue. Like the game that really sold me on it, I was playing against my brother, and I got a good start, and I got a lot of points at the beginning of the game, and then my brother started kind of building up his forces, and he was getting more powerful, and I realized towards the end of the game that it would actually be better for me if I started losing conflicts, because you have this player board here with a bunch of different abilities that you can kind of unlock as you're going. And I had built mine out in a way that I would actually end up scoring more points if I was losing conflicts. So I kind of just started like spreading my characters around and built up a situation where I could win by losing, individual conflicts. And it felt kind of on brand for my character. I was playing as Ra, and it was kind of like, well, I'm just going to start sacrificing my followers in order to score the last points that I needed. So really interesting game, really thinky. Again, a lot of content in this base box, and also great looking miniatures. But it's really what sold me on it is it is a smarter, more strategic game that plays very well at one-on-one, which is not always the case with these kind of games. So that is Ankh, Gods of Egypt, my last minis game recommendation. And from there, we will move on to co-op. My favorite co-op that I played in 2022 is Atlantis Rising. I only have one co-op actually recommendation, but Massive Darkness and Marvel United kind of also fit into this. Atlantis Rising is a game, as it says there, plays up to 7 players, which seems insane, but also I would kind of like to do. I've only played this one at 2 players as well, but it is essentially kind of a worker placement game where you will see in a second, you have this big island that kind of has all of these groupings, these peninsulas kind of coming off of it. Each peninsula, each section on the peninsula will let you do different things. You're rolling dice to kind of collect resources, but there is kind of a push your luck element to it. There's a gamble to it where basically you'll roll dice in order to get whatever resources you're going for in that location. But the lower down on the peninsula, the easier it is to hit that target. But before you'll commit all your workers out there, and then you'll flip over like a disaster card from the deck. And that will determine an area that will flood. And so you will flip that one over. And if you have people on that location, like you can see in the example here, they just get washed away for that round, and you lose out on that. And so from that point, it is really just kind of a race. You have these different objectives that you have to complete, each of which will actually give you a bonus ability, which is nice. But you're just kind of racing to get those done while the island is flooding, and each of those peninsulas is kind of disappearing into the ocean, and you have to get done as quick as possible. Just a ton of variability in the game. The objectives that you're doing you can change up, but then you also have a ton of different characters, and each one has their own special ability. It kind of feels in a way similar to Forbidden Island, which is a very smaller kind of family weight game. This feels like a much bigger, very blinged out version of a co-op game like that. The production values of Elf Creek games are just through the roof, and this is no exception. Lots of really great, meeples. Each one is a different kind of, look to them. Tons of content in this box. Really intriguing, really fun race. You can kind of customize the difficulty of it in a bunch of different ways to get it to the kind of perfect difficulty that you're looking for your play group. So definitely check that one out. That is Atlantis Rising. The last group that I have in this massive video of recommendations, I'm calling this group of games Thinkers. Games, if you want something that will really get your brain burning, these are the games for that. And the first one is one that I've talked about before. The first two I've actually talked about, so we'll go through them quickly. But that is Dune Imperium, which came out a couple years ago. 1 to 4 players, 60 minutes to 2 hours. That sounds about right. This is, it's such an interesting idea. It is basically worker placement mixed with deck building. So you will have a deck of cards, your own personal deck of cards that you will be adding new cards to with different abilities. but you'll be using those cards, you'll play them out, and those will determine which spaces on the board you can put your guys out onto. And so from there, it's this interesting mix of trying to win conflicts, which happen every round, and those will give you different bonuses. But it is a race to, I think, 10 points, and there are different ways that you can get those points, but each one, like, you really have to kind of bust to get there. And there's Timothy Chalamet there, which everybody loves. It's a race to 12 points. Or no, actually, I think it is 10 points, but you can get up to 10 points. That's kind of the tiebreaker. But you're kind of forging alliances with the different groups from the books and the lore, whatnot. Those can get you points, and then you have the conflicts that will get you points. And there's this is another game where you have this huge deck of cards that you are buying and adding to your own deck, and those are giving you better powers it's kind of building on it as you go on, and it's just very satisfying, very thinky. It has an arc to it where, you're getting different resources at the beginning of the game, and then you're trying to figure out when you should convert those into other resources, because you're going to need different things at different points of the game. And just very smart, very smart design, and it gives you a lot to think about, which is why I'm calling it a thinker, quote unquote. That's Dune Imperium. The second game that I have mentioned previously, so you can go look at those videos if you want to know more about them. But this one is The King is Dead from Osprey Games. This is another kind of what looks like it would be a dudes on the map, but I'm not actually the biggest fan of those kind of games, area control or area majority games. But I like when people come up with interesting twists on them. And in this one, the twist is that you don't control a specific color or a specific faction. The different factions, everybody will be manipulating the same factions, but then you will also be gaining influence in that faction. So if you have the most influence of the faction that controls the most areas on the board, at the end of the game, that is how you win. And you have this very small hand of cards to do that. You'll play different cards throughout the game, and you can actually. It's interesting because you choose when to play or when to pass, and each time everyone has passed, you will determine one more of those areas. You have the 8 different areas. So you'll say, okay, everyone has passed, so now we go to this area, we figure out which of the factions controls it, you lock that in for the rest of the game, and then you continue. But you don't have to pass. You can keep playing all of your cards. You can play all 8, all 8 of, or however many of those cards. You can play them all in the first round. You could play them all in the last round. Both would be a bad decision. You probably want to space them out more, but you're kind of reading your opponents and figuring out, okay, when is the best time? How can I flip this around and get this faction into the hands of, the Scots or the English or whoever is controlling for that faction, because I have a lot of power in that faction. Or maybe I'm just going to move them around and I'm going to use that in order to get more influence in one of the other factions that's doing better. Lots of head games here. Very simple rule set again, that you will go through relatively quickly, and then you'll sit there and you'll think, wow, wait, what are the implications of this? How is this affecting everything else? That is The King is Dead. I am just continually impressed by this one. Great game. The last recommendation out of all of these, stars David Bowie there. Maybe or maybe not. This one is called Inish. It's a 2 to 4 player game from Madigo. They always make great games, great production values on their games. This one, so another kind of pseudo area control game, dudes on a map, but again, plays completely different from what you might expect from that kind of game. This Inish is another game where you have multiple victory conditions that you can go for. So everyone, you are kind of in everybody's head trying to figure out which one to go for, which one to deny your opponents. But then what's interesting about it is that so you have those different different victory conditions, but you basically have to, it's almost like check, like calling check in chess, where you have to declare like, okay, I have fulfilled this victory condition, and if I am still fulfilling it at the beginning of the next turn, that's when I win. And so there's a real like head game going on there where you're trying to fill those conditions, but ideally you want to fulfill it at the end of your turn when your opponent, doesn't have the cards to kind of counter it and deny you from getting that victory condition, or also tying you with another victory condition so that it's a tie and it goes to the next round. You're doing all this by, again, a hand of cards which you are drafting with your opponent or opponents. And everybody will know the cards that are in that deck. So that's another interesting aspect to this one, where after your first round, like, you'll know which cards are in there. Each card has a different super powerful ability that, can like make or break you if you play it at the right time. And so you have the cards that you chose. You're trying to figure out which cards your opponent has. If you're playing one-on-one, then you'll know more or less which ones they have. If it's multiple players, you're trying to take that into account. But so you're putting out your characters, and then you're also building out the map as it goes. And another interesting aspect of it is that each location also has another card that has another powerful ability. And if you have the most people in that area, you will get that card in the next round. And so that hand of cards that you have is variable. You'll be building it out. There are also the red cards, which you will trigger in different ways, that you'll get those, and you'll add those to your hand. So you may have way more cards than your opponents do, at which point you can keep on playing, after they have passed or after they have run out of cards. You can just keep on putting out those cards and building up your power in those different areas. Like I said, there are 3 different victory conditions, but the most interesting one, which again, this is another thing that blew my mind as I was playing it. One of the victory conditions is you control areas. You control the different areas. You have the majority of the people in those areas, but the victory condition is the number of other players' characters that you have in those areas. So basically, like, you have control over them. You have 3 people in that area. They have 2. So you have control, but you're counting those people. You're counting those 2 people. And if you ever get to like 5 or 6 or whatever, that's one of the victory conditions. What is so interesting about that one is it is essentially a noose that your opponents can hang themselves with. And that's exactly what I did in a game of this with my brother, where I was building out, he had control in a bunch of different areas. I was building out in basically one area. I had all these guys, and then I was like, okay, I have enough. One of the other victory conditions is just have your people in a bunch of different areas. So I was like, I can do that. And so I started moving all my people out into a bunch of different areas. And then I realized, oh, wait, I don't have majority control in any of these areas. So all of these people are actually scoring for my brother because he's the one who controlled those areas. And so he only had to do a quick couple maneuvers at the end of one turn, and all of a sudden he had dominion all over all my characters, and I was sitting there scratching my head and counting down the time until I could play it again, because it's a really thinky, really smart game. And that other deck of red cards that was there, like, there are so many of those different special ability cards that those will be different every time you play, and you will there's plenty of replayability there for a game that is essentially a game about learning the base cards and getting into your opponent's head and figuring out how you're going to outsmart them. Holy cow, that was a ton of board game recommendations. I think we got up to 20 in total, even more if you want to count the solo ones separately, which you can go ahead and do. I'm not going to stop you from that. Hopefully you found something in there, maybe a couple of games that will appeal to you. If not, maybe board gaming isn't for you. In which case, I don't know why you're watching such a long video about board games to begin with. But hey, I'm not judging you. I'm not judging your time. I appreciate you watching. We appreciate your support. If this was helpful or informational to you or entertaining, then you can press all the buttons that justify our existence to the almighty algorithm. Otherwise, you can go to patreon.com/minmax. Support our actual existence, which we appreciate even more. Lots of great stuff over there. And on the MinMax Discord, we even have an entire channel devoted to board games where people come in and give their recommendations about what they've been playing and what they really enjoy. So even more board game recommendations. I'll do another one of these at some point this year. Probably all the other games from 2022 that I haven't played enough of yet, which I will hopefully play this year, plus some 2023 games. We'll throw them all in there. We'll make another big video, and we'll send that out for you to enjoy too. Until then, I'm Jeff Marchiafava. Thanks for watching us at MinMax. Thanks for your support. See you next time.
You've seen the headlines, you know that the media landscape is consolidating. Having truly independent games media is more important than ever. MinMax can exist independently as a place about games, friends, and getting better, but we need your help. The good news is that it's easy. Just click on that subscribe button or unlock a mountain of benefits by going to patreon.com/minmax with 2 N's. Thanks so much, everybody.